Hi, everybody. This is Getrude Matshe again here in sunny Wellington, New Zealand. And welcome back to the Her Story podcast series. I have Karen Kelt with me today. Karen, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. Also here in sunny Arizona. So even though we're far apart, it's warm.
That's awesome. Please just tell everybody who you are, how old you are, and share your story with us today.
Okay, my name is Karen Kelt, and I was born in Sao Paulo, Brazil in 1953. So I'm 66. I will be 66 in a month. And when I grew up in Brazil, I had a very privileged lifestyle. Grew up in Brazil and lived there for all of my life. And I got married when I was 23. I married the great-grandson of a New York State senator whose family, they were also Americans living in Brazil at the time.
Okay.
And 4 months after we had this fairy tale wedding, we were woken up in the middle of the night and taken from our home by men who claimed they were police. At the time, I did not believe them. Kidnapping was something that happened fairly regularly.
Okay.
And they showed us badges, but I didn't believe them, but they were. And they ended up taking us to a prison in downtown Sao Paulo. We were never charged with any crime.
Did they say why they were taking you?
Well, they told us that they were looking for drugs and drug dealers. Okay. And we were neither. We were not anything of the sort. And it was common for police in Brazil to extort money from Americans. It was very common. So we began to assume that that's what was going on. Little did we know that they were trying to get a tremendous amount of money, which obviously we didn't have. So they kept us for 45 days. And
45 days?
Yes, 45 days. Oh. And we were together for the first 3 days. And then they separated us, and that's when things went from bad to really bad. I was raped, and then we were told that we were going to be 3 days there, and then that we would be released. And on the third day, when they came for me, I made the assumption that they were taking us out, that they were going to let us go. And instead, they took us to a room where they tortured both of us. And then they kept us separate from that day forward for 45 days. I would see my husband occasionally when we were taken to that room again. We were finally released. We paid, our family raised $400,000, which in 1976 was a tremendous amount of money. And yeah, and we were released, but we were both absolutely destroyed. We were both broken people. We were told, as was the time, not to talk about it. Just get over it, put it behind you. You have this bright future ahead of you. Don't talk about it. Move forward. If there's any advice I would ever give anyone who has any kind of a difficult story, talk about it. Talk about it. Tell people.
So you were suppressed for years. How long before you thought you were in a position to talk about it?
I didn't talk about it until 2010.
Are you serious?
I'm serious. What
did that do to you inside?
Oh, I was a mess. My marriage fell apart. My husband turned to drinking. I tried to get pregnant. Another mistake. Don't do something like that to try to save a marriage. I did get pregnant, but our marriage just didn't survive, didn't make it. And in Brazil at the time, there was no divorce. It was illegal. A man had full control over his wife and his child. And for me to feel like I wanted to live anyplace else, the only place I could think of was the US.
Yes.
And for me to do that, I would have to basically kidnap my son and run away. My parents, my father, who was also, a Brazilian male, very strong individual, who ran everything with a very strong hand, forbade me from leaving and told me that if I left, that he would completely disown me. And my mom, of course, went along with him. That's what women did.
Yeah.
That's what women did. And so I did. I managed to get enough money together and bought a ticket for myself and my son. I had to pretend that I was going away for a weekend to visit friends, so I couldn't take anything with me. I had a tiny suitcase for myself and a tiny suitcase for my son. And we came to Florida. And from there, I kind of moved to New York because my mom's family lived there. Okay. But I knew I couldn't contact them.
Yes.
Because if anybody found out where I was, they would come to take me back. So I hated New York. I knew it was so cold. It was too cold. And I moved to California. Kind of put a pin in a map. I had never been there before. Put a pin in a map and said, okay, California, they have beaches, they have sun. I think I'll do this. And found out, of course, that I didn't have the ability to get a job. I'd never worked before. I didn't know how to cook. Nothing. But I did. I got a job as a waitress, and I cleaned toilets and did all the things that I had to do to survive.
Yes.
And eventually, in 1980, that was 1979, that I went up, or early first month of 79. And then in 1981 or 82, I think it was, I got a divorce there in the States. Okay. And they granted me custody of my son. And so even from that point, I still was totally embarrassed, and I didn't want to talk to anybody about what happened. But unfortunately, as I know now, that's not a smart thing to do, because I started drinking heavily. I got into using drugs. I was just a mess. I was having
to find a way to cope with all of that.
Yeah.
Wow.
It was really hard. In 1974, I met an amazing man who in 1976 became my husband. And even him, I told him why I was in the States and, what had happened, but I never really talked to him about it. I never gave him details.
Yeah.
It was still something that I bottled it up. Yeah. And I said, it's staying here. And that's what it did. It stayed in there, and I was angry a lot. I had a lot of issues.
Yeah.
But eventually, like I said, in 2010, I did start talking about it. I started taking yoga.
Okay.
And yoga was this vessel that gave me the opportunity to really reflect on what had happened. And I understood that I had to get rid of
and let it go. Get it out of your system.
Absolutely. And so that's when I decided that I would write a book and tell my story. But I was still afraid that there might be repercussions.
Yes.
And, I was going to self-publish and do all this and using fictional names.
Yes.
And it just didn't feel quite right. And then I was invited to give my testimony at the Brazilian National Truth Commission.
Oh.
They had a program that, the only way I describe it to people, it was similar to apartheid.
Yes, I was going to say, it sounds like the Truth Commission in South Africa.
Yes, and it was. And they got over 2,000 people that had survived those types of atrocities. And all of them, and myself included, gave our testimony. And the hope was that Brazil would then overturn a law that gives amnesty from prosecution to government torturers. But it didn't. It didn't. And then I met some amazing women who were authors and who worked in the publishing industry. And they suggested that I write a memoir. And so that's what I've just done. And the book is coming out in April of 2019. And again, anybody who has anything, that's what healed me. That's what healed me. It was talking. It was cathartic to write it.
And that's the thing about, I was there in South Africa when the Truth Commission was running. And it gave people a space to sit side by side with the person who hurt them. And all they could do was just tell their story and what they experienced. But the healing that came out of that was phenomenal.
Yeah. We didn't, because most of the victims are actually still in Brazil. The Truth Commission sent not an envoy, investigator to the UN in New York, and she did one-on-one interviews with me and with several other people, and I didn't ever meet any of them. And the interesting thing about it, interesting, was that when the Truth Commission published its report, and it's 2,000 people, some of whom have lost limbs or lots of horrific things. When they gave their report, everyone was very hopeful, but there are still maybe between 10 and 20 men who are still alive and who still work for the government, who were the ones who inflicted this. They took out a full-page ad in the biggest newspaper in Brazil, saying that they will never apologize, that they would do it again if they had to, because they were following orders, and they would never apologize to anyone. And so that was the whole testifying before the Truth Commission. It was hopeful.
Yeah.
There was this big hope that it might change things. But when they took that ad out, we knew.
Away.
Yeah.
It took everything away.
Yeah. And we knew they wouldn't change.
Wow.
And today, and that's because, I don't know, Brazil is very male dominated. Women are, they're second-class citizens. They do what the men tell them to do. Yeah. And for me, being in the States, I was able to thrive as a woman. I got jobs that, once I was married and I was settled down with my family, I did executive jobs. I was the first ever female general manager of a men's professional hockey team. Just things that never in a million years would I have dreamed of being able to do had I stayed in Brazil. And
so I want you to touch on something, because what I'm trying to do with this podcast series is to identify and see issues that are experienced by women worldwide, the impact it's had, and the nuggets of wisdom that you learned from that experience. Now, I can relate to what you've said because I come from a male dominated society, coming from Africa and Zimbabwe.
Yeah.
The whole notion of family suppressing stories of rape, of physical and psychological abuse. What would you say to a woman who's in that position right now? What would you say to your younger self to find a way to cope, to navigate that space?
I would say that anything toxic like that in anyone's life, you need to get away from it as quickly as possible. Find a women's group that would support you and hold you up. Even if it's friends, talk to friends and they can lead you to a group of women. The idea of staying in a situation where you know it's wrong is very difficult for anyone.
But the challenge then comes in family. When you move, you're leaving everyone you love, everyone you know behind. You had to leave your mom.
Yep.
She was brought up in that environment. That's all she knew. That was her worldview. How did you cope with being away from your loved ones?
It was very difficult for me, and that's why, unfortunately, that's why I turned to drinking a lot and doing drugs, because I was always looking for something to replace what I'd left. Yeah. I honestly never regretted leaving because I knew that I was in control of myself.
And it was a matter of self-preservation.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But
did you get to reconcile and reconnect with your family since?
I did. Eventually, I connected with my mother, and she had, in the 2 or 3 years that I didn't speak with any of my family, she had realized herself that she should have stuck by me.
Yeah.
And we had a very emotional conversation. Because I was angry at her.
Yeah.
I wanted her to stick up for me and go against, this
all these. Oh.
Yeah.
You felt like
she
couldn't. Down.
Yeah, she couldn't. So our first reconnection was very emotional, and she told me that she realized that she had made the wrong choice and that she had to have stuck by me. And in fact, within a year, she told my dad, who was now, quite older, she told him that she was going back to the States to be with me and her grandson, and he could either come or not. And that was a huge step for her.
Yes.
But that's exactly what she did.
Oh,
and she was already in her 60s.
So you, in a sense, empowered your mom to break out of that as well.
I think so, because she really, and when we talked, she told me, I always thought I was doing the right thing.
Yes.
I always thought I was protecting you and doing the right thing, and you would have this amazing life if you had stayed in Brazil, house and all the extra things that came along. And she thought that she was protecting me.
Yeah.
But she realized that it was more important to have that support of my family.
And to have her relationship with her daughter.
Yeah. And my son, it was magical because, we got to spend a good 20 years together before she passed, and it was wonderful.
That is beautiful.
Yeah.
And did you find a space in your heart to forgive the people who hurt you?
That's the biggest part for me, because I always kept it all locked up inside. I didn't talk about it, but it was there, and it was angry. And in yoga, this day that I had this sort of aha moment, my teacher at the end of the class started talking about forgiveness. I didn't know her. You know, she was my teacher and I'd seen her a couple of times and I didn't know her.
Yeah.
So we're laying there in Savasana with our eyes closed. And she says, forgiveness is not, it's not about letting go of the past. Mm-hmm. Forgiveness is learning to live in the present. And when she said that to me, and I still do, I got goosebumps everywhere. And I went home and I thought to myself, well, because at the time, I hate to go back like this, but at the time when we were released, several people mentioned to me that they would have those men killed. And that was something they could have done in Brazil, the men who had taken us.
Yes.
And I that day that we were released, I said, no, you know, I don't want to be any part of that. I don't want to ever see them again, but that's not what I want to do.
You didn't want their blood on your hands.
Yes. Well, not just that. It wasn't in my heart to ever do anything vile or evil like that anyway. But my father and several other people said, we'll kill them for you. We'll have somebody kill them. And I just said no. And I thought that I had let it go by doing that.
Yes, yes.
But I hadn't. No. And that's what yoga sort of, by thinking about it and talking about it and talking with friends, that's when I was able to, you know, put that aside.
Yeah. Oh, wow. You have an amazing story, Karen. Thank you so much for online and sharing this morning.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Good luck with your book.
Thank you.
As soon as it's online, then I can share it with my community.
I would love to.
You are a phenomenal woman. I'm just so happy that you found happiness again and got on with your life.
Thank you so much, Gertrude. I look forward to staying in touch, and I'd love to see stories of the other women that you're working with as well.
I will share the links, definitely.
All right.
My mailing list. Take care, Karen.
You too. Thanks so much.
Bye.
Bye.